bum, 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 bum. Yeah, I'm a little bit late this morning. Sorry about that. But thank you for coming in to join me anyway. Today, I've already moved on to the orange juice phase. So if you have a beverage, doesn't need to be orange juice, but this would be a good time to simultaneous sip. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. So I had several topics. None of them are big news today. But let's talk about them in order. Number one, we've got the Stormy Daniels story that just won't go away. There are claims that she signed a non-disclosure agreement. And then when she went on Jimmy Kimmel said, "Did you have an affair with the president?" And she acted like, maybe she didn't. So there may be some weird situation where she's trying to not violate her agreement, but also violate the agreement. So the story today about Trump's lawyer independently paying $130,000 to Stormy Daniels is, first of all, maybe not entirely believable, but it also doesn't seem to matter. It just doesn't seem to matter at all. Because the president's approval rating has just gone to, it ticked up again. And even more interesting, the generic ballot between a generic Republican and a generic Democrat has pulled even, looking toward 2018 election, for the first time. So remember, I think I told you maybe a month ago or so that the midterms were shaping up, at least the direction was toward a Republican win in 2018, unexpectedly. Now, lots could happen between now and then, and lots of things usually do happen between now and then. But so far, everything is lining up Republican. And if nothing changes, it's going to be a good day for Republicans. I'm going to go back to my favorite topic that I talk about all the time. I talk about how the anti-Trumpers state as though it's fact that there is the following evidence that the president is a racist. And they'll say stuff like Charlottesville and Birtherism, etc. But if you were to look at any one of these claims, they're ridiculous. What makes them powerful is that there's so many of them, but they're all ridiculous, except for the ones you go back 20 to 30 years or whatever. The ones that are 30 and 40 years ago, I'm willing to believe have more substance to them. But let me give you an example. So there's somebody named Nick on Twitter who says that he's arguing with me on Twitter, and he says that the Birtherism movement is racist. And then I said to him on Twitter, would you state in public, right here, meaning on Twitter, that you believe Trump would have ignored an easy line of attack, in this case, questions about eligibility for the office, if Obama had been white? And then I said parenthetically, watch what happens to your brain now. So the argument is that birtherism is racist, and I said, can you imagine? Would you say in public that if Obama had been white, that Trump would not have used this obvious weapon that was available? There were some questions about the birth certificate, so he used it. And it's ridiculous to think that after watching Trump for a few years in politics, that anybody thinks he would leave any tool on the bench if it was useful. He would literally say anything that was useful to his point. Yeah, it was used against McCain, it was used against Cruz. It's just the most common attack. So now that I've completely obliterated in public this person's argument that birtherism is racist, because nobody seriously can question that Trump would have used the same attack with a white candidate if it was available. Now, what was different is that that attack was available because there were some questions floating around that Trump is not the one who invented, right? So how does he respond once I've annihilated him in public? Do you think he answered the question? So the question was, can you honestly say in public that he would not have done this with a white candidate? So no. So his brain is blowing up in public. So I did this intentionally just because it'd be fun to do in public. So instead of answering the question, he says back to me, would you state in public, right here, that you believe Trump would have... I'm sorry. Where his response? Where'd it go? 3 more replies. Just a second. Got to find his response. Oh, so then Nick says, no president's birth certificate has ever had so much controversy. Is it a coincidence that this is the first half black president and its vitriol was spread by racists? Would you deny this in public? All right. So instead of just answering the question, he points out that no other president has had so much controversy about his birth certificate. He says, is it a coincidence? And I say, first part's a coincidence. That was what was available. So to attack Obama, the birth certificate was the available tool. To attack Hillary Clinton, the server situation and the email were the obvious tools. In every case, he uses the tool that's available. So was it a coincidence that it was the first black president and that he used the birther thing? Yes, that was a coincidence. It's just what was available, all right? And so that's what I said. And I said, then his second part was, is it a coincidence that the racists are the one who spread all this birtherism stuff? To which I say, that part's irrelevant because there are bad people in every large group who agree with the group for their own reasons. So, for example, some people who are Republicans might like controlled immigration for economic reasons or for security reasons. But they could be in the same party, Republicans, as racists who like those same policies because it's fewer brown people in their opinion. So it's completely normal that racists would have the same opinion, but for their own reasons, for racist reasons. Because most of these questions only have 2 ways to go, right? So you're either in favor of, tighter immigration or you're not. In general sense, there's just 2 directions, tighter or not as tight. The bad people are going to agree with one of those sides, but for their own reasons. So yeah, there will always be bad people in every big group who agree with the group for their own reasons. So anyway, this poor fellow on Twitter, his argument fell apart pretty quickly in public, but it won't change anything. His opinion will not change at all, even after watching his opinion being just completely eradicated in public. All right, what else we got going on? So we've got, the Rob Porter thing just will never die. The anti-Trump press is all obsessed about the timeline and who knows what and who did what, etc. But here's the interesting question. I would agree with all the people who say that a wife beater is not a good person to have in your administration. So there's no argument at all on the basic part of that. But there may be a larger question of, did somebody know, enough that they should have acted sooner, and why didn't they? And those are good questions. But do we imagine that those questions should be on the same level as preventing nuclear war, running the presidency efficiently and all that. And then it gets a little tougher, because even if you imagine that that Kelly, ignored this willingly because it was just easier for whatever reason, he thought it would go away. Whatever you think of Kelly, in order to get a win on that small point that he should have fired Rob Porter sooner, or should have known, or he should have done something differently, or maybe he lied about what he knew when, or something like that. And those things are all important. I would say, those are all worth discussing. It's all important. But they're not really as important as running the country. And to the extent that we see him as a unique character who can work with the president as chief of staff, probably in a way that would be hard for anybody else to duplicate. All right? Because it's pretty hard to get control of this particular White House, but apparently he did a good job. So do you want to cut off your nose to spite your face? To me, it looks like it's just the media trying to take down the White House any way they can, piece at a time. And I'm not entirely sure he's going to leave. You would think he did. You would think he would. What else did I say I was going to talk about? Yeah, there's some kind of a shooting, but we don't know much about that yet. Let me go back to, there's, of course, interesting stories about Kate Upton, but we won't read those. All right. Looking at politics. Let's look at politics. So that Susan Rice email is pretty weird. The one where she says, Susan Rice says that the president told them to follow all the laws and play it by the book. Blumenthal started the birther thing, did he? Well, Blumenthal just keeps coming up, doesn't he? All right, looks like it's a boring Newsday today. Proves Comey lied under oath. I'm not so sure, because he talked about meeting the president personally as opposed to in a group. So I'm not sure that's what it is. Did you see the Piers Morgan takedown of Omarosa? Oh my God, that was brutal. So apparently Omarosa is not nice to work with. And according to Piers Morgan, she propositioned him for sex on The Apprentice because it would be good TV. And he turned her down. That was brutal. How is domestic dysfunction related to security clearance? It's related by blackmail. So if there's somebody who doesn't want his story to get out about domestic abuse, that person is a blackmail risk. But it also tells you something about temperament that would be important. And temperament and credibility and trust, they're all in there. Thank you for reading my book. Yeah, Porter can't be blackmailed now, but it's a little too late. Stormy Daniels' story proves Trump is blackmailable. Or is it the opposite? Because what can you imagine that could come out now that Trump couldn't just brush off? I mean, if he brushes off the porn star and the other accusers and Pussygate, He might be the world's most efficient brusher-offer of scandal you've ever seen in your life. I would think Trump is about as close as you could get to unblackmailable, unless it's on financial stuff. That would be different. Thank you for giving my book Win Bigly to your children. Has anybody seen anybody change their opinion about Trump after reading Win Bigly? So some of you, a number of you mentioned here in the comments that you gave my book Win Bigly to some folks. You saw some people change their opinion. Somebody said, yes, I did. Wow. You love him more now. Okay. Wow. I was not expecting that many yeses. Holy cow. Oh my goodness. I really wasn't expecting this. Look at all the people in the comments whose minds were changed by my book. That's very rare, by the way. People don't really change their mind because of a book. I turned somebody less right-wing, they said. Wow. Well, that's great. I'm happy to know that it made a difference. I see some people asking about Netanyahu. So Benjamin Netanyahu's in some legal troubles over in Israel. The police have found reason to proceed with whatever legal process they have there on 2 counts. Now, one of the things that they're accusing Netanyahu of, I don't see any chance he could get convicted of. Because there's a billionaire who was friends with him when he was out of power, who had been generous with him when he was out of power. They were close friends, family friends, did things together. That billionaire was still friendly with him and generous with him after he was in power. I just don't know how you can make a case out of somebody having a friend who's generous. Is it illegal to have a generous friend? Probably most people who have close friends who are billionaires have achieved have gotten some kind of benefit from that. Either they fly on the private plane or they go on vacations together and the billionaire doesn't want you to not go, so maybe the billionaire pays for your part of the vacation just because it's easier. So I think when you've got billionaires as a friend, it's hard to turn that into something illegal. But that said, I don't know anything about the legal system in Israel, so I can't predict anything. Would a war between Israel and Iran ruin the Golden Age? It wouldn't help, but I don't see that happening. All right. I think I need to run and do something else here in a minute. So I think Netanyahu has probably years of legal process before he's in any kind of serious trouble. So that's sort of a slow-moving scandal over there that may not have any impact on anything. We'll see. It's a developing story. All right, that's it for today. Logging off. Oh, I was going to talk about the national debt. All right. So I tweeted the other day that who pays the national debt? All right, we say future generations, and that's true. But which part of the future generation pays the debt? And I was speculating that the rich have to pay all the debts because they're the only ones with money. So if only the top half of the income earners in America are even paying federal income tax at all, you would expect that that's the same group who would have to pay down the debt. So I was saying, what's the difference between an estate tax, which taxes the next generation, but only of the rich, and a national debt? Because the only people who have money to pay the national debt are rich people. So it's the future generation of rich people. So it's similar in some ways to an estate tax. But other people weighed in and said, well, no, inflation is the only way to get rid of the debt, because you couldn't tax people enough to get rid of it. But over time, you can let inflation creep up so that your fixed debt payments look smaller over time because everything else costs more. And there's something to that. But then I was trying to sort out, okay, but does it still put the burden on the rich or the poor? And it was hard for me to sort out, because if you own real estate, the value of your real estate will go up with inflation, so that's good. But if you have a fixed income, that's bad. So you'd expect that rich people would get more benefit from the inflation. But on the other hand, doesn't inflation hurt rich people's businesses? And doesn't inflation also make your wages go up? So if you're a poor person who's renting, not poor, but let's say lower income person who's renting, your wage goes up, and it equals what the prices of everything else is that goes up. And so it was hard for me to sort it out. I couldn't figure out if the national debt is even helping or hurting income inequality in the long run. It's just too many variables. So it's interesting. I think the interesting thing that comes out of that whole discussion is that you and I can't really tell what the impact of the national debt is. I'm not entirely sure economists can either. I really don't know. Because some amount of inflation is good and it's baked into the system, a low level. If we were to manage the economy well so inflation never got out of control and wages were in fact rising because we restricted immigration, let's say, and other reasons, I'm not entirely sure who pays down the debt. I don't know if it's poor people or rich people in the future. The only thing we know for sure is that it's people in the future. The impact is fewer jobs. Yeah, but if you're looking at 20 years from now, when things have to get paid back, if you imagine it's 20 years from now, everything's going to be different. We could have a robot economy. Climate change could be the biggest deal in the world or no big deal. I mean, there's so much that could change. It's really impossible to know even if debt is good or bad at this point. So there's a similar argument with the debt that there is with, what was the other topic? I just lost my thought. There's the debt and, immigration. So I was going to make a comparison. So there's some people saying that Senator Flake, for example, is saying that the amount of legal immigration we're allowing should not be constricted. So Senator Flake is saying, don't go from this much legal immigration. I'm talking about the people who've done everything right, legal. Don't go from this much to this much. And Trump wants to have less legal immigration. And this raises the interesting question. How in the world do you decide what is the right amount of legal immigration? Assuming that these people in the future will have to, be vetted, and they'll be vetted and they'll be adding to the country's economics. Why wouldn't you want more of them? I don't really understand what would be the point of having high standards for getting into the country and also limiting the number of people. Those seem to be at odds. Because if your standards are high enough, don't you want them all? Because we've got kind of a demographic problem. We're not creating enough children. So I would think if you could bring in an immigrant with an education and especially immigrants who are going to have lots of kids, because we need more kids, don't we? So I don't know, what is the right number of legal, highly vetted, qualified immigrants? I don't know why we need to limit them. I've never even heard an argument for it. There might be an argument, I just don't know what it is. Likewise with the debt. Nobody really knows what's the right amount, right, for the debt. I mean, do economists agree that, this much debt is good, but this much is going to destroy us? Nobody really knows. All right. More babies for the middle class. So the trouble with Americans having babies, let me tell you what's wrong with the idea of increasing the birth rate among Americans who are already in the country. Here's the problem. Being a parent in the United States is a terrible, terrible deal. It's just terrible. You can love your children and you can love the idea of having kids and you could want kids, but being a parent is just a terrible, terrible deal. It's terrible financially, it's terrible for your happiness, it's terrible for your relationship with your mate. It's just a terrible deal. Now, I understand everybody's different, right? So for some people, they just love it. And I have no disagreement with that. People are different. But I think there's a growing understanding that the process of spending all of your time around your kid, like if you have a kid in these days, you have to be involved with the school, you're driving them around all the time. They've got their cell phones, they're calling up drug deals and bad sex and everything else that they shouldn't be doing as kids. It's a terrible, terrible deal to be a parent. I don't recommend it for anybody in the current day. I think that if you went back to the 60s, for example, having kids was a pretty good deal. It just made your family bigger and more, just everything about it was better. But when I was a kid, my parents would send me to school, and then I would come home and check in, and then I'd be gone all day, and I only had to show up for dinner. And sometimes I would cook dinner. So lots of times I was in charge of cooking dinner, because both my parents worked. But my parents didn't put much effort into it, right? And I'm not saying that they were bad parents, because they weren't. It was just it was different in those days. So for example, I was the number one player on our tennis team at school. So I had tennis tournaments that I would go to. Neither of my parents ever watched me play tennis once. Not once. And when I asked my mother why she wouldn't want to watch me play tennis, like every other parent goes and watches their kid play a sport, she said, "Why would I want to watch somebody play a sport? I'd like to play a sport." And she did. She played a lot of sports. But why would I want to just sit there and watch someone else do something? What's the point of watching someone else do something? Right? I'm glad you're happy. I'll support you playing tennis, but why should I watch it? It just doesn't make any sense. And as much as I didn't like that, for all the reasons that people wouldn't like that, she was right. Right? It made far more sense for her to do what she needed to do to make herself happy during those hours I was playing tennis, because I was happy and she was happy. Otherwise, I'd be happy playing and she'd be unhappy sitting in the stands looking at her watch saying, "When the hell is this over?" Yeah, my mom was a badass. Scott needs a psychologist. Probably always true. All right, I gotta go.